Welcome to JWL Sports, where we review all the best sports clips from around the world. Now, you're probably wondering, why should I watch over here instead of anywhere else? And that's because over there, they don't care about what you have to say. They say this all the time. They talk down to us. They think we're just a bunch of clowns on YouTube, Twitter. But I think it's the opposite. I think we know exactly what we're talking about. So I read every single comment. So if you think what I'm saying is the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, let me know in the comments below. If you think what I'm saying is the most amazing thing, then definitely please let me know. Either way, let's get into some discussions, let's get into some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We are building an amazing community here, and I would absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to, something that we're really excited to be part of, and I think we're well on our way to doing it. So without further ado, let's get to it. We're watching a clip of The Herd with Colin Cowherd talking about the firing of the DC, the defensive coordinator for the 49ers, Steve Wilks, after only one season. I've seen a lot of people talk about this, especially like on Twitter and stuff and in the comments on YouTube. I have very specific opinions with regards to this. And before I share them, let's just see what Colin has to say. But I've seen a lot of people float around like, was it race? Not like racism necessarily, but the idea of, white privilege and black coaches always, getting a shorter leash and all of that, which I dispute. I mean, that has nothing to do with this situation. Has that happened in the past? I'm sure. And we're not gonna break that all down over black and white coaches, but I do take issue that every time a coach is fired or not fired, we just bring race into it. And the truth is that it's a lot more. Not to mention, the 49ers historically have had black defensive coaches, so defensive coordinators. So this idea that race has anything to do with it is just asinine and absurd. And, let's just jump in to see what Colin has, and I'll share more thoughts.
After one season, he took a lot of the criticism. It didn't appear Kyle Shanahan was overjoyed, happy in the second half when he had to burn a timeout because he thought Steve Wilks' defense was aligned too obviously. I think it's more this. The previous two San Francisco defensive coordinators, very intense, rah-rah, motivational, inspirational. Robert Saleh, now coach of the Jets, and DeMeco Ryans, now coach of Houston's. Steve Wilks isn't that. He's much more stoic. San Francisco doesn't run, you read, complicated schemes. It's that Seahawks cover 3. They don't blitz exotically. They just line dudes up. We're better than you. We're going to be aggressive and go after your quarterback. So maybe motivation, game after game after game. Saleh, DeMeco Ryans provided that. So there's a couple of things here. Kyle Shanahan is stoic. So San Francisco's probably always going to be better served with somebody on the other side of the ball, also on the staff, who's a bit of a yeller and highly intense. If you look at the Rams, Sean McVay, huge energy. Yet his defensive coordinators, a Brandon Staley and a Raheem Morris, are more chill. Dan Campbell in Detroit, he comes out swinging. Press conference, sidelines, yelling at refs. He works very well with Ben Johnson, more cerebral. DeMeco Ryans, again, player, chest out, alpha, big energy. Bobby Slowick, academic, quiet, his offensive coordinator, a former PFF guy. Steve Wilks, like Shanahan, would rather bury his head in a play sheet. That's who he is. And the best staffs are often a mix. Remember a couple of years ago when Philadelphia got to a Super Bowl, Nick Sirianni's yelling at fans, he's yelling at refs, he's yelling at anybody. But Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen, very reflective, very chill. Jim Harbaugh's staffs, he provides the intensity. Everybody else is a notch less. Nick Saban, Alabama, older defensive coach, barking constantly. His best coordinators, younger, more chill, Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian. So Steve Wilks has gotten a lot of jobs in his career. I never thought this was a great fit. Yeah, in that Super Bowl, when Shanahan had to burn a timeout, you could see he wasn't happy. And in the biggest games and the biggest moments, you can't make a big mistake. And it looked like Shanahan thought Steve Wilks had with his alignment, so they make a move. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I want to unpack a little bit because, Steve Wilks has bounced around a little bit at this point. And I think the personality dynamics that Colin brought up, I think, are really important to kind of address because a lot of people I see, some of the complaints are, he was a great defensive coordinator. The 49ers defense was good. It wasn't his fault that Christian McCaffrey fumbled or the punt return fumble or, the missed extra point and all this type of stuff. And they also said, like, look, they held Patrick Mahomes to not a lot of points, yada, yada, yada. Those things are all true. And that's the problem when you win, any of those issues, any of your own individual flaws get overlooked because you just won. We see this firsthand with Travis Kelce screaming at Andy Reid. We're not going to unpack that here. I've already unpacked that in another video. I stand by that being a disgrace and more than just, competitive fire. But since and actually even Travis Kelce has come out and said that was wrong. But since they all won, they get to downplay and be like, whatever. Okay, it doesn't actually become a big deal. Where if they lost, that would be a big deal. And we've seen this happen with the Golden State Warriors and Draymond Green. When they're winning, the technicals and the fighting and the yelling by Draymond is like, that's just what he does. He's fiery, this, that. You need that muscle. And when they get older and they start losing it, he has problems. He needs to grow up. He needs counseling, yada, yada, yada. And so that's what happened with the 49ers. They lost. And so now, even if you're not the direct reason why necessarily, you still technically played a part in it, right? Like if the Chiefs ended up losing, it wasn't because Travis Kelce. If the Chiefs ended up losing, it wasn't because Travis Kelce was barking at Andy Reid, but people would still say that's part of it, right? Even though if Christian McCaffrey doesn't fumble and they win, you can't say, they lost all because of, Travis Kelce fighting with Andy Reid. You wouldn't say that. But you could say it's still part of it. It's the energy. It's this, it's that. And so this idea that Steve Wilks was kind of flawless is just not true. And again, he did make mistakes in the Super Bowl. I understand what the score was, but let's be real here. The Chiefs offense was never that potent this season. This isn't the high-flying Chiefs that were scoring 30-plus points a game on all these teams. That's not who the Chiefs were this past season. So holding them to not a lot of points was not necessarily this big, massive thing here. It really wasn't. And when you're in the Super Bowl, it's the ultimate spotlight on you. So any mistake, any issue, any flaw is going to be magnified to the nth degree, right? And that's what we kind of saw with Shanahan, calling the timeout in arguably like an incredibly key important moment. And then when he did, remember you even saw Romo when they when Steve Wilks called up the blitz and Romo was just like, oh my God, it caused Romo pain. It was literally like, oh no, what are you doing? Why would you do that in that situation? And again, just like Shanahan got critique for going away from the run game in the third quarter and going for, and taking the ball first at overtime and all of that. Like Shanahan has gotten a ton of criticism. And the truth is that now when a defensive coordinator is getting criticism and their personalities might not be complementary to one another, like Colin Cowherd, pointed out, then that ultimately can lead to the firing. It's like, listen, you weren't the reason why we lost, but you also didn't necessarily put us in the best situation to win, depending on how that game unfolded, as well as we need to be even better. And so I need a better defensive coordinator. Not to mention it's also a scapegoat. That's the benefit when you're the head coach. When you're the head coach, you get to just be like, this is the reasons why we lost. Yes, I made a mistake, but also our defensive coordinator was not good enough, so I got to let him go. Right? There's a lot of scapegoating. And that is the benefit of being, in charge, of being the head coach, being the GM, being the owner. You get to kind of point fingers at other people. And in a way, Shanahan has earned that right in a weird way. I'm not saying that it's okay or that it's right, but I'm also not saying that Steve Wilks is just a scapegoat, because clearly Shanahan was not happy. Put it this way. If Shanahan truly, really enjoyed working with Steve Wilks, he would keep him. Because that's also what people don't seem to realize either. They look at just the numbers. They look at just the stats. They look at just the color of their skin. They look at all these things. And it's like, you have to enjoy who you work with. You have to feel comfortable. You have to have trust more than anything. And that's why people like Cam Newton struggle to get another job in the NFL. Even Carson Wentz, for that matter. These are some quarterbacks who you say, listen, they're good enough. Dwight Howard in the NBA. Carmelo Anthony. It's not that these players just can't play anymore, but it's that either people didn't like them, the coaches didn't like them, they had a poor locker room presence, they were untrustworthy, you couldn't have faith in them. Those all things matter. It's not just performance. It's not always just performance. Antonio Brown, to me, this is a great example because Antonio Brown was trouble and you couldn't trust him. But he was good enough where you would still take the chance on it because you know you could win with him. Theoretically, your team would be better with him than without him. So you'd be willing to deal with some of the toxicity and give him a second, third, fourth, fifth chance. You would deal with some of the media fallout because he has such a disgusting off the field life that you would be willing to accept it because, hey, you could win a Super Bowl with him, as Tom Brady proved. But the moment his production was no longer good enough to outweigh that, it's like, all right, see ya, bye. Antonio Brown could still play football today right now, honestly, and he could still help out a team. He's probably better than OBJ for that matter, honestly. Probably better than a lot of other wide receivers. But it's not worth it anymore. And obviously, Steve Wilks, this is a significantly less intense version of that because Steve Wilks doesn't have any of those problems as Antonio Brown. But it's just that any of his defects, and I'm saying that very liberally and very loosely, not saying that he has, true, pure defects to himself, but just any of the drawbacks of him as a coach, as everyone has, whether it's Andy Reid, Shanahan, McVay, like we all have those defects. It's just that when you now put that in combination with the personality, with some big key misses in a big game like the Super Bowl, not to mention, it's not just the Super Bowl. Think about all the points that were given up against the Detroit Lions. People take a lot of issue with that, which I don't necessarily take a ton of issue with that because I think the Detroit Lions were a good team. Also, the 49ers defense was their weakest point of their season, of this team. That was what you had to worry about. The offense had it locked and loaded, but it was really the defense more than anything. And then Bosa came out and made a couple statements that were just not putting Wilks in the best of light. I mean, they weren't like direct shots at Wilks, but they also weren't very much like, it didn't give you a lot of trust in Wilks either. Because I think also that decision is also somewhat made after talking, with other players, seeing how they felt, the Bosas of the world. I don't think that's like all it necessarily, but I think a Shanahan does have his finger on the pulse in that regard. You have the idea of how is the defense responding to this coach? And ultimately, Shanahan reached the point where he said, nope, we got to make a move. And then you just got to go from there. So, but those are my thoughts on this. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you think Steve Wilks should have been fired? Do you think it really just has anything to do with just the Super Bowl? And, it's not his fault Greenlaw got injured, and it's not his fault that there was fumbles and this, that. I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please don't forget to subscribe. As I said, we are building an amazing community here, and I would absolutely love to see you part of it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much, and see you next time.